what do you say? What's your rating on what we've done so far?
Okay, thank you once again for having me here. Just like you've said, and in one of the things you just mentioned, we've had some level of capital importation in the last few months. But just taking a little bit a step back to what is the meaning of the ERGP, of course, the economic recovery
and growth plan,
yes. And what were they looking at? What was the intention of government? First of all, to restore growth. Secondly, and you remember when Bill Gates came to Nigeria, one of the key things he mentioned was around investing in the people,
yes,
which is key to any growth that you might want to have. So that was one of the other areas. Another area was around, of course, driving industrialization with focus on the SMEs. Now, so drawing from that, in terms of stability, looking at what has happened pre and post, what we currently have, especially within the windows of Forex, inflation, GDP, there has been a level of stability in that area. That was one of the key areas that the ERGP plan was looking at to ensure stability. Of course, like you did mention, there are still areas, there are still significant areas to look at. But in terms of stability, yes, we've achieved, the government has achieved some level of stability. And of course, looking at it in terms of capital importation, we've had significant level of capital importation, but that has its own side as well. Okay. So,
now, in your report, you mentioned a number of areas where you said that they've made progress. You talked about VADE's introduction of the I&E window of agriculture and food security. But for you, which would you say have been the most successful so far from a policy perspective? I like what you did with VADE, but let me hear your thoughts first.
Now, so you can't really pin down a particular to be specific or to be significant, because looking at growth, if you take one and leave the other, you are likely going to miss out. So all of what has been achieved are those that has helped the government to be at the level it is right now. So you can't really pick just one point of it to say, oh, this is what is significant.
Okay, but when we talk about government revenue, that is significant, and that's around the tax. I mean, the voluntary assets and income declaration scheme, and just a total overhaul of the tax, tax policy in the country. For VADE specifically, according to the report, and I'm sure you got that also from the Federal Inland Revenue Service, out of 262 companies, they've been able to get some cash from them, 20 billion out of 305 billion. Some might say that that is a small amount. Yes, I mean, it's a start, but I'm just thinking 3 years on, I'm thinking, could we have done more? Definitely.
It's possible we could have done more. Looking at what has happened, so the question we should ask ourselves is, if this policy is not in place, so we wouldn't have had this 20 billion. There is still a lot to be done, definitely. However, what has been achieved based on what the government has given to us is what it is. And I believe with concerted efforts, looking at what has been included in the ERGP plan, if it's well followed, I think there should be some efforts and a level of inflows that will come into the coffers of the government.
Okay, so one of the things about the ERGP was that they wanted to diversify Nigeria's economy, or the source of Nigeria's revenue away from oil. Now, oil is back up at $78, about maybe 77 at the moment. But that means that over 20 billion naira is coming, with it at that level, over 20 billion naira is coming into the excess crude account every day. Do you think that this oil figure could now make Nigeria say, let's, dial back a bit, we're good in terms of revenue? So do you see a threat to the ERGP now that this is...
Well, as is with all forms of objectives and plan, there are likely going to be some disturbance along the way. However, if the government decides to follow, because the core objective of what the government is saying is that we need to diversify. And of course, from what you've seen, is the diversification that has brought in the 20 billion and several other revenue. So, and if you remember very well, the ERGP budget was between $40 to $50 per barrel. And with news this morning, it's likely going to go up to $100 per barrel. So what the government really needs is focus. If you want to diversify, the excess that is coming in can then be put into other resources that will help to put appropriate infrastructures in place that will help those other areas to grow as much as possible.
That being said, if one looks at what's happened to the economy in the last 1 year, it's been a growth driven by the rise in oil prices. And I've been thinking to myself, take away the oil, take away the growth in prices. If we were still around $35 per barrel, which we were before we went into the recession, how effective would the plan have been? for the economy right now?
Yeah.
Would we still be in the recession?
I believe the government will still need to put more efforts, stay put with the plan. The plan is there. The plan is fine, but they will need to stay and ensure that it's pursued.
So for you, what would you say is the biggest challenge? You've mentioned focus, but I'm thinking something more specific. What else would you say that perhaps they need to put more steam in to give it more bite?
I believe the drive. There's need for drive. Once you drive, of course, without the drive, the 20 billion that we're getting in, via VATs wouldn't have come in. So the drive, focus, and ensure that there's a level of professionalism in whatever the government is doing.
Okay, so now I just want to tackle the quick win. So we've got this far, right? We're back in recovery. The economy grew 1.9% last year. We're expecting Q1 2018 figures next week. Oh no, 28th of May, sorry. But what now would you say that the government needs to do? Just shift its focus to, apart from passing the budget, of course, but just shift its focus to one area to make things better.
Put in place appropriate infrastructures.
You think infrastructure is the way to do it?
Drive the industrialization via the SMEs. Encourage more people to set up and bring in more business. Yeah.
I want to quickly, we have just 1 minute left. I'm a little concerned with the tax drive to widen, the efforts to widen the tax bracket. The tax to GDP ratio is still at 6%. Yeah. I think it's even lower now that we saw it. So I'm thinking, is it that we just need to be patient and wait for more time before we begin to see that take effect? Yeah,
patience is necessary, but of course, like I've said, we still need more drive because to a great extent we're still the lowest in terms of tax to GDP across our peers. So we need to do that drive to ensure that the level of tax is increased and that revenue comes into the coffers of the government.
Okay, well,